Hi, welcome back to day 13 of online learning. At this point, I want to make sure that you already did locating fractions less than 1 on the number line. I'm going to read the directions for you. So A, mark and label the points 1/4, 2/4, and 3/4 and 4/4 on the number line. Be as exact as possible. B is to mark and label the point 2/3 on the number line. Be as exact as possible. And C, mark and label the points 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, and 1/5 on the number line. Be as exact as possible. So do that if you haven't already now. Please make sure that you're taking your time and showing your work. And remember that fractions are equal parts of the whole. So do that now, and tomorrow we'll be going over it. So you should have finished your do now. What I'd like you to do is please get out your locating fractions greater than 1 on the number line from yesterday. We're going to be going. This is the do now from yesterday. So it's locating fractions greater than 1 on the number line. So task A is to mark and label points on the number line for 1/2, 2/2, 3/2, 4/2, 5/2, and 6/2. So this reminds me a lot of when we were doing from the ant when he was walking his blocks. So I remember that the ant was walking half a block and then he needed to stop to rest. So he started at 0 and then he went half of a block and had to rest. So that's when he was going just 1/2. Then he went another half of a block or 1 whole block, but that's when he went 1, 2 halves. Remember that what we said when a number is over itself, so when the numerator and denominator are the same, that means that it's 1 because it's 2 parts when there's only 2 parts of my whole. So now it goes another half block. So that would be 3 halves because it went 1, 2, 3 half blocks. And then it went another half block and got 4/2. I'm keeping my denominator the same because it's still 2 halves that make up 1 whole. So now I have 2 wholes. And then 4 halves, and then another half would be 5 halves. And then another half would be 6 halves. So that's when I have 1, 2, 3 whole blocks, but it's broken up into half. So I have labeled 1/2, 2 halves, 3 halves, 4 halves, 5 halves, and 6 halves. So now it says to mark and label a point on the number line for 11/3. Be as exact as possible. So I'm looking for 11/3. And just how I see 6 halves or 4 halves or 5 halves, when a numerator is greater than my denominator, so when my number on the top is bigger than my number on the bottom, that means that it's more than 1 whole. So I know it's going to be bigger than 1 because it's not 3/3. It's bigger than that. But I'm going to break up each of these into 3 parts. So I have 1/3, 2/3, and 3/3. I'm going to be breaking it up into how many parts is my whole. And then another group of thirds, so 4/3, 5/3, 6/3. And it's 6/3 because it's bigger than 1, and it took 1, 2, 3 more thirds to make another whole. So 3/3 is 1, 6/3 is 2 whole blocks. Then another group of thirds, so 7/3, 8/3, and 9/3. Then another group of thirds, so 9/3, 10/3, 11/3. And I'm gonna stop here. and I want to check my work. So I see that I split up it into thirds here. So 1, 2, 3 parts. So 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. Then another 1, 2, 3 parts until I got to 2. So 4/3, 5/3, 6/3. Then still 1, 2, 3 parts. So 7/3, 8/3, 9/3. And then 1, 2, 3. So I have 10/3 and then 11/3, which is where I needed to stop. So what I want us to do is still continue to go over pages 373 and 374, which you did, which was where we compared fractions using less than, greater than, or equal to. And how I want us to think about less than or greater than is that they're like an alligator's mouth and it's facing to whichever fraction is greater, or whatever number is greater. And when we're comparing fractions, like if we were to compare 5/8 and 5/6, it's easy to look and think, oh, my denominator 8 is bigger, so therefore 5/8 is bigger. But I want us to be making a fraction bar to check our work and think about our thought process and think about, just because the denominator is bigger, does that mean my fraction is going to be bigger? Let's check our work. So I'm going to make 2 fraction bars. And it's so important that my 2 fraction bars are the same size, because then I can't compare my fractions because I have 2 different sizes. So if I was to compare this fraction 5/6 and then make my fraction bar for 5/8 this big, that would make my whole 2 different sizes, so they're not able to be compared. So I need to make sure that my fraction bars are the same exact size. So for 5/6, I'm going to separate my fraction bar into thirds first, and then put a line down the middle, because 1, 2, 3 times 2 in each is equal to my denominator, 6, and I'm going to shade in 5 parts. So now I have 5/6 shaded in. Now I'm going to separate 5/8 into 8 equal parts by first putting it a line down the middle to make 2 parts, and then make it into fourths, and then put 2 parts in each, because 4 with 2 in each would be 8. Then I'm going to shade in 5/8. So now I'm going to compare my 2 fractions by drawing a line right down from where 5/6 is. And what I can see is that more is shaded in with 5/6 than 5/8. So what I can say is that 5/6 is what to 5/8? Is it greater than, less than, or equal to? And what would the symbol look like? I would say that 5/6 is greater than 5/8. What I was saying before is what I noticed on a lot of your worksheets. So often, you guys were assuming just because the denominator is bigger, that means your fraction is bigger. But what I'm actually noticing is that this is 1/6 and this is 1/8. When I drew my line down, I saw that 1/6 is actually bigger than 1/8. So when a fraction has a smaller denominator, like in one half, my fractional parts are actually bigger because I'm breaking up my whole into less parts. So if I was to give you a brownie and I said that you can either have 1/8 of a brownie or 1/6 of a brownie, pause me and think about when would you be getting more if you got 1/8 of your brownie or 1/6 of the brownie. If you said, if I got 1/6 of a brownie, I would get more, you're right, because I'm getting more of one thing because it's broken up into less parts. When you compare fractions, you need to be using fraction bars or number lines to then also be showing how you actually see it. You can't just rely on looking at my fractions and think, oh, one number is bigger than the other. Because let's look at the fractions 3/4 and 5/8. 3/4 and 5/8. Both of my numbers are smaller, both my numerator and denominator are smaller in 3/4 than in 5/8. By yourself, using two fraction bars, I want you to work on 3/4 and 5/8 and compare them. Pause me now and we'll go over it after. Let's use a fraction bar to actually compare these fractions. Remember, my fraction bar needs to be equal. So first I'm going to do 3/4 by breaking it up into two parts, and then I'm putting 2 in each. I'm going to shade in 3 parts. Now 5/8. I'm going to break it up in half, then make it into fourths, and then break it up with 2 in each fourth. So now I'm going to shade in 5/8. So here I have 5/8 and 3/4. I'm going to draw a line down and see that 3/4 is what? Think about how I can write and compare my two fractions of 3/4 and 5/8. So I can write that 3/4 is greater than 5/8. And I see that because more is shaded in. So it doesn't matter if my numerator and denominator are smaller than another fraction. I need to be showing my work to make sure I'm comparing them. And I also want us to think about this in a different way. So what if I drew 3/4 and it looks like this, and then I did 5/8 over here. And yep, my fraction bar is the same size, but for 5/8 I made it like this. They're equal parts. Now I'm going to shade in 5/8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is it super easy to compare this fraction bar with this fraction bar? it's difficult to compare these two fraction bars because they don't look the same because they're not separated in the same parts. When I did it here, all I had to do was just draw a line down the middle, but here I can't do that because this half or this part isn't shaded in. So I'm not able to compare. So I want to, when I'm shading and comparing them using fraction bars, I want them to look exactly the same how I split them up. So right down this way. Let's look at the two fractions, 7/6 and 7/4. And I remember that we said that when a numerator, my top number, is bigger than my denominator, my bottom number, that means it's more than one whole. So if I was to do 7/6 and 7/4, which are both numerators are bigger than my denominators, I know that I need to have more than one whole or more than one fraction bar for each. So for 7/6, I'm going to put 2 fraction bars to show 7/6. Then again, my fraction bars need to be the same size to show 2 wholes. So that will show 7/6. And then I'm going to make 2 fraction bars to show 7/4. So for 7/6, I'm going to break up my first whole into 6 parts and shade in all of them because 6/6 would be 1 whole. So now I shaded 6/6. And now I need to do the same thing over here where I separate it into 6 parts. So now I have 6/6, and I know I need to do 1 more 6 to equal 7/6. My denominator staying the same, but 6/6 plus 1/6 equals 7/6. So now I'm going to shade it in 1/6. And I knew that I had to do 2 fraction bars because it was bigger than 1 whole. Now for 7/4, I'm going to break each up into fourths. And I'm going to shade in 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, and 4/4, or 1 whole. And then I need to do 5/4, 6/4, 7/4. So here I shaded in 4/4, here I shaded in 1, 2, 3/4, which is equal to 7/4. So now I'm going to draw my line. To compare. So I'm drawing my line. And I see, it's not really straight. And I see that 7/4 has more shaded in than 7/6. So I would write that 7/4 is greater than 7/6 because I have more filled in all of my fraction bars. Now I had to use 2 fraction bars for 7/4 and 2 fraction bars for 7/6 because I have more than my whole. Your have to today is representing and comparing fractions, and we're going to be looking over it together right now. So here is what this looks like. What I really want you to do is please either print this out, and if you can't print this out, number it very clearly 1, 2, and 3. That way I'm able to see your work for all of it. I need to see your work for every single problem. I don't want to see this handed in without any work being shown. So please do this on a paper copy. That way I'm able to see all your work and know what I need to be helping you on. Here is your have to for the day. So you need to complete locating less than 1 on a number line. So you're due now from earlier. And the assessment you need to do independently on a paper copy. So either writing it 1 through 3 and showing your work on paper that way, or printing it out on printing out. I don't want it done online. And then third, you're going to go on iExcel and only do the highlighted skills. So if you got a 0, it's that you did no work. If you did a 1, that means that you only did the do now. If you got a 2, that means the do now and the assessment, but you didn't show any of your work for it. And if you got a 3, that means you did both assignments and you also showed your work for everything, for every problem.